hearing a lot that there's a lot of confusion, basically. There's been a recent redistricting effort, so people are going to the wrong polling places. The voter ID law that was enacted last year was frozen by 2 county judges this year. But at the same time, election officials are telling both county clerks and voters to still bring your ID anyway in case a judge happens to do a last-second overturn of the law. So people on both sides of the polls are confused about how this ID law will be implemented and whether it will be needed. Also, as you noted, the Department of Justice is there to monitor and make sure that these elections go smoothly, although it seems the evidence is showing that it'll be going anything but smoothly. For the first time ever in Milwaukee, there has to be a set of Spanish-speaking or Spanish-language ballots available for the Spanish population there. And then on top of it all, there's just a general Voting Rights Act compliance that basically all election officials have to be abiding by. And the Department of Justice has declared that they're going to go there to monitor the elections and make sure that there's compliance there as well. So, I mean, there's just a whole cluster of things going on right now in Wisconsin.
We're talking to Brentin Mock, a writer for colorlines.com. If you go to colorlines.com, you're going to see his writings on there. We have links above his video. He can't see it, but the Final Mix stream has his URL and information about the stories that he's writing. And you're following this Wisconsin issue is critically important because, as a white guy sitting here, if somebody says, bring your ID, it doesn't feel particularly intrusive. It's sort of normal in a way. But this wasn't invented because they thought that I should bring my ID. Like they can't figure out who I am somehow. Quite clearly, the purpose of a voter ID law is a Jim Crow light, or some way of making, picking out a group of, let's say, Democrats who may or may not rely on public transportation and therefore do not have a driver's license and therefore don't have that ID and therefore wouldn't be able to vote. It's a pretty easy syllogism, isn't it?
Yes, and I want to caution that I try not to use the Jim Crow analogy because that's a really loaded historical term. People were lynched, killed, dragged to death, as they were trying to vote. African Americans were trying to vote, and obviously we're not having that kind of situation here today. But you're absolutely right that the voter ID laws that have been passed in states like Wisconsin are, we can assume that they're focused on minorities such as African Americans and Latino Americans. And let's just talk about Latino Americans for a second. DOJ was brought in to ensure that there were Spanish language materials available for Latino voters, in Wisconsin. But on top of that, there's a chill effect that happens when any kind of ID law is imposed above something like the vote. Latinos are already under a spotlight based off of all kinds of really restrictive immigration laws across the country. And so, no person wants to be racially profiled. No person wants to be mistaken for maybe an undocumented person and then arrested and possibly deported. And so if you have a Latino voter who's a eligible voter, who's a citizen, but who might be afraid that poll watchers or people who are asking for ID who could mistake them for an ineligible voter and then maybe possibly turn them over to authorities and then lead to a whole mess that they don't want to get involved with, you can see how that could chill a Latino voter and make them decide, you know what, I'm not even going to go to the poll, I'm going to stay home.
Isn't that ultimately the plot of the play, Brentin Mock, when we look at, and I'm just going to say Republicans or GOP because they've been in a superior position, I think, in pulling off a lot of this stuff over the last decade. But the ultimate home run for them is that nobody shows up to vote except 6, 7 people. 6, 7 people that are like them. And literally, the rest of us simply don't show up. We're burnout. We're disenfranchised. We lose all passion for the process and feel that it's so broken and so fucked up. Why even bother getting in the car? Why even go try to vote? And thereby having an absence of voting, those who do are quite clearly going to be voting the correct way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're correct in that that the authors of this play are all Republicans, right? I mean, there are no Democrats lined up to impose these voter ID laws because they know what it leads to. In terms of the plot of the play, I think we can safely assume that the end game is that minorities, low-income residents, elderly people, students, will decide not to come out to vote because all of those populations tend to vote Democratic. So putting a voter ID law in place, whether it's done purposefully to suppress a vote or not is maybe debatable. But what we can say for a fact is that it definitely tips the electoral scales in favor of Republicans because all of the populations that are most vulnerable to suppression are populations that tend to vote Democratic. So your Republicans who tend to be wealthier, who tend to be white, who tend to have a car, who tend
or
to...
two, or three, or four if you live in Lake Geneva.
Exactly. And who tend to know their local elected officials because not only have they voted in previous elections, but they've, donated thousands of dollars to their campaign coffers. So, they have all kinds of influence over these elections that, low-income people and minorities and people without cars simply don't have. So, we don't have to sit here and say, that there's a conspiracy. We can safely say that the facts stack up in a way that demonstrate that influence and favor is given heavily to Republicans and detract from any kind of electoral power or balance involving Democrats.
Let's talk for a second, Brentin Mock. And Brentin Mock, by the way, is a writer for colorlines.com, writing a lot about voter rights and how millions of Americans, mostly minorities, are going to be shut out of voting this election for political reasons. Huge issue, obviously, for Democrats, since Republicans are endlessly, verbally, I would say intellectually, but that's probably really the wrong word when applying it to them. But campaign-wise and through messaging, attacking blacks and poor voters and Latinos, as he's pointed out, Latinos being one of the largest growing, fastest growing populations in the Midwest. People don't sort of intuitively think about it that way, but it really is true. And so to disenfranchise people that are likely to vote a certain flavor, and you don't want that flavor, you just try to remove that ice cream cone and make sure the ice cream is not scooped on top. Let's talk about the official reason, Brentin. Why do we need a voter ID? My God, corpses are rising from the grave and voting. Really?
We don't need one. I think most people who are out here trying to protect voters' rights agree that, it's a completely unnecessary law. Now, if you ask Republicans and proponents of voter ID laws why they're quote-unquote needed, they'll say it's voter fraud. In the same breath, if you ask them to cite one example of voter fraud, they can't give you one. Not anecdotally, not statistically, not empirically. All they can tell you is that voter fraud exists. One senator in Tennessee, I believe, who in trying to rationalize why voter fraud exists, even though you can't put a finger on it, gave this famous analogy of saying that, hey, I know if I go to a Grateful Dead concert, I know that people are smoking weed, even if I don't actually see it. You know, I mean, that was literally his justification in the state legislature for why voter ID laws were needed. I mean, it was a completely stupid analogy, but it just shows what kind of paranoia is in the minds of Republicans who swear, who swear on their relatives that that people are going out voting fraudulently, but no one has been able to pick up any real statistics about this happening in any kind of real way.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because guys like you who are writing for colorlines.com, who do put in so many hours researching this, we're unfortunately forced to sit in an argument that they've invented and try to disprove it or prove it. And you end up running around and around in circles, and they laugh and laugh and laugh and keep paving another mile of cement in another direction, another mile of cement in another direction. And meanwhile, you and I are trying to make a proof, trying to figure out the hypothesis, the theory. Is it true? Is it not true? To what degree? And they keep paving more and more miles of insanity in all the directions. And it's a kind of bizarre terrorism because it's made up shit. It didn't exist before. Wisconsin historically has been one of the most open-minded states in the Union. 1969, gays got their first sort of taste of civil rights. This is not a place where we go, whoever lives there, but Wisconsin has traditionally not been the place that they're talking about until people like Scott Walker get in there. But this does seem like a real Mayor Daley on steroids kind of Chicago way to do business. And here's a question. The television media there, the evening news in Milwaukee and Door County and all these other places around there, if they were asked, why are you not covering it from the perspective that people of color are being perhaps proposedly disenfranchised, why is that not an interesting story to you, Mr. Anchor? I'd love to hear what they say.
Let me just say this. I mean, it's not just TV reporters. I mean, TV reporters definitely, they come up short in terms of how they report about this and a lot of different issues, right? I mean, it's like the weatherman, who just kind of reports what he sees up in the sky, but won't, would never mention anything like climate change, because, I guess there's too much context. 40-ton
trailers flying through the air this afternoon? No connection to climate change, buddy.
But, I want to draw attention to a recent study that came out from Media Matters, which basically talked about, a group called the American Legislative Exchange Council, who I'm sure you're familiar with. This is a group that basically puts Fortune 500 corporate executives together in a room with Republican state legislators to come up with all these ultra-conservative policies, such as, busting unions open, taking away labor rights, taking away environmental protection rules, and yes, how to put voter restriction, ID laws in place. And, this group, ALEC for short, American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC for short, they drafted a model legislative bill, which was adapted by dozens of states around the country, including Wisconsin. And this is where these bills derive from. However, when you look at the media that covers, voter ID laws, they never mention ALEC. I mean, there's been clear connections made between the model legislation that was drafted at these ALEC conferences and a bill in Wisconsin that was passed. And yet you never hear any, it's not just TV reporters. You don't hear the print media reporting on it, the daily newspapers. And Media Matters did a study. They looked at 8 states in which is a strict voter ID law. I believe Wisconsin was one of them. And they did a LexisNexis search on, their coverage of voter ID laws and found it, scant mentions of ALEC, and it's just, it's like trying to, talk about, how the dark side is taking over in Star Wars, but not mentioning Darth Vader. It's just beyond comprehension that these things are overlooked.
Let me ask your thinking on that, because this really is the fundamental stuff. This is the central issue, the elephant in the middle of the room, whether it's an elephant that's painted red, white, and blue, or just an elephant, that somehow we endlessly overlook. How is it even remotely possible that a story like that gets spiked? Not to use the word conspiracy, because we've been well trained by everyone from Ari Fleischer to Dick Cheney to Karl Rove that you're clearly crazy if you think somebody might get, two or more people might get together and make a decision. You're the crazy one. So let's not use that word at all. Let's not use that thinking. But how is it that these big, huge stories where there's all this controversy going on and nobody is talking about Darth Vader? Is that a decision that's made at high levels, or are the people covering it simply at the Kardashian level and they are giving their A+?
I'm not in those newsrooms in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. I don't. I don't even pretend to begin to know what kind of algebra goes on in the minds of TV reporters, in any state. There's a lot of, editorial context that's missed in their reporting. But it's a real mystery why, in the eight major states where there's strict voter ID laws in place, how you report the skeleton of the story and not, mention a group like ALEC at all, how you don't mention someone like Chris Kobach at all, Secretary of State over in Kansas, who's also an author of a lot of these voter ID bills, but who has been, very closely tied to interests that, want to criminalize, Latino immigrants in America, and who's been aligned with a lot of scary hate groups, such as FAIR. In California, you should be pretty familiar with FAIR. So, these are the kinds of, things that reporters should be looking into. I don't know if they just kind of overlook it and then they have lazy editors who don't send them back out to find it, or if they are putting them in the stories and then you have editors who, for whatever reason, write it out of the story. I can't pretend to know.
I'm going to give you a piece of a personal experience. I was sitting with the West Coast bureau chief of the AP. So this guy is,
okay,
you wouldn't think is a layabout and a slouch, right? The West Coast bureau chief of the AP. If anything, you're going to assume this man knows shit. Lots of it, right? He can speak widely and comfortably on the most vast range of subjects. His expertise is probably somewhat unparalleled, certainly on this continent. So I asked him how come he hadn't done any stories on depleted uranium, something really mainstream, you would think, given the Iraq and Afghanistan and the sheer metric tons of the stuff that has been dropped and all the sickness connected. And his answer to that was, what's that? Now, I'm assuming you're kidding me, Timmy, or whatever your name is, West Coast bureau chief of the AP, but this was a real wake-up. What's that? And that, I think, is really part of the problem, is that's where we're at, is that D+ is the new A+, and by God, the people who are writing the letter grades are telling you what the new letter grades mean. And that's where the bar is now. So what you're doing is this really kind of adult stuff that would have been mainstream 10, 15 years ago, but now they try to write it off as being some weird esoterica that appeals to a couple of eggheads somewhere. But yours is the big shit. So let me show you this. Can you see that?
Yeah.
You see that okay?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
That is the head of the American Nazi Party. This douchebag here.
Yes.
And the American Nazi Party and the Ku Klux Klan, together as a group, as buddies, were on the front steps of the Los Angeles City Hall about 6-7 months ago. We couldn't believe it. LA, right? And there were thousands of them. And LAPD was out there protecting them and us, and we kind of weren't sure who was actually being protected there. But I got this guy's his card made out of pretty much toilet paper. But the shit quality of his card and his thinking notwithstanding, that the Ku Klux Klan and the American Nazi Party can show up at the steps of City Hall in Los Angeles without a blemish, where the mainstream news is talking about how many police were dispatched to protect the freedom of speech of this and that, and by God, there was a bottle thrown, and not talking about the elephant in the middle of the room, which is the fucking Nazis have shown up in L.A. The Klan, right? That's the story. And what an uphill thing. So I'm just saying, I get what you do, the heavy lifting you do, the sober look you have to make, and to try to haul millions of people with you into the story so that they get what's going on. And that's that's not the arm wrestle that you signed up for when you're a storyteller. Like, well, shit. Now I got to get people to learn how to read so they can read my story.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that, right now that I'm reporting on how both Democrats and Republicans and Tea Partiers and, independents are all going out to, do these huge voter registration drives, trying to get as many people as possible registered to vote, because all of them, including Republicans, are heavily interested and invested in having as much of the electorate come out to vote and participate in democracy as possible. I wish that was my job. I would love to do that. Instead, I have to explain why people are putting in place all kinds of rules and laws and barriers and roadblocks, so that as little as possible voters will come out, for reasons that defy explanation and all intelligent understanding altogether, unless we get into that conspiracy area that we talked about, which is that Republicans really just don't want people participating. I mean, there was a guy who I can't remember his name, who wrote an op-ed. He's a conservative who wrote an op-ed just a few months ago, who literally made the argument that low-income people don't deserve to vote. It should actually be illegal for low-income people to vote. They don't deserve it.
Well, that was the founding fathers.
I think this is a real mentality.
Founding fathers didn't have a problem with that thinking. I mean, that was the law, that if you had land, you could vote. If you were working on the land, you had no business voting.
Right. And I think that's where conservatives, would like to take us back to,
They would love to. And this icky
Exactly.
notion, too, that women should be able to vote, too. I mean, that's kind of fucking outrageous, isn't it? We know from Rick Santorum and others what women ought to be doing, right? And that they can say this on CNN with a straight face and have Anderson Cooper keep them honest by saying, oh, interesting. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you look at Florida, right, where Republicans have voted into law a voter registration suppression bill, where third-party voter organizations are placed under onerous restrictions in terms of going out and registering people to vote. Well, the number one third-party voter register, in a state like Florida and in many other states, is the League of Women Voters. I mean, sweet, elderly women going out registering people to vote, and then you have people in the legislature who are literally creating laws aimed at them to restrict their movement on this kind of, on this kind of thing. I mean, that,
quite clearly have some out lesbian membership or something going on in there, and they're socialists. So it's really obvious to you and me. Hey, I want to thank you, because it's a thankless job that you do half the time. You're setting out to tell a story, but really what you have to do is structurally bring people into the kindergarten and the first grade so they can even sort of approach what you're really trying to tell them. It's double duty. You have to be not only the storyteller and the guy who shines the light under the rock, but you also have to be the kindergarten teacher. And it's hard. It really is hard. But you're doing the good work, my friend, and we recognize that. And you got some fans here, just so you know, officially.
Great. I appreciate you bringing me on the show to allow me to continue to talk about this. It's a really important issue.
Yeah, and we think so too, and we'd love to check back with you down the road. I know today is a big day in Wisconsin, and it hasn't quite shaken itself out so that we have any absolutes yet. But in the next number of days,
that's because of all the confusion. That's because of all the confusion down there, up there.
Right. So you're going to be writing updates constantly, I imagine. And what would be the easiest place for any of us to be able to see your work?
Yeah, if you go to colorlines.com, my blog is right on the homepage under my name, Brentin Mock. But quick announcement, I'm here in New York today to meet with The Nation magazine, who will also be carrying the blog. Not today, but I believe starting this week, and maybe as soon as tomorrow, where they will also be carrying the voting rights coverage that I'm doing, and then I'll be writing a few investigative features that will go in the Nation's print magazine. So this voting rights project that I'm writing for is actually a shared project between colorlines.com and the Nation. So I want to make sure that the Nation gets proper mention in this.
Oh, wow. Listen, I'm sure they're horripilating with delight to hear that. And we're huge fans. Give our moist regards to Katrina vanden Heuvel and everybody else over there. And congratulations. What a wonderful, wonderful collaboration to have with them. And how handy it is for us, for the regular civilian, to be able to find you now even more easily. So your hard work is paying off. And all 18 of us that understand it are thrilled that we get to find you in an easier way now. Sorry about my cynicism,
Great.
but I am so gnarled and so poisoned by this shit. I don't know. I can't even get up anymore. It's just so profoundly irritating. Has this ever happened to you? Maybe not. But in the last 10 years under the Bush administration, we were screaming at the top of our voices through our megaphones, screaming, oh my God, the sky is falling, Chicken Little, Jesus, Dick Cheney and his 88th heart attack and his Darth Vader helmet, and the slaughtering of people all over the planet, and the bait and switch and prestidigitation. And now that's some kind of weird historical memory, and suddenly people are like, I think there's something wrong in the country. I'm not sure, but maybe we should occupy something. And it's like, it feels like so late, so little so late, and so many people are so burnt out and just trying to keep that spark alive. So we look to people like you who can get up with your upright Royal, your Underwood, and hammer out the friggin' truth and spark some light at the end of that tunnel. Is that the grimmest thing you've ever heard in your life?
That's pretty grim.
Well, I'm grateful, my friend, and thank you for also carrying a sense of humor with this, because on the left, or the progressive left, or whatever we want to call it, a lot of people, it is so serious that we forget to crack a smile, and if we don't have kind of a human connection with each other, we do end up the robots that they hope we become, because then you could pick off a robot one by one. So let's laugh louder than them, because it will always win.
Yeah, and speaking of human connection, thanks for having a sense of humor about the Google Hangout problems we were having in the beginning.
Well, I'll tell you the side effect. I'll tell it to you in public. People, it's very endearing when an audience gets to watch us struggle through technical things, because remember, we're really kind of inventing this technology as we go. We're figuring out how to use it,
right.
How we want to use it, and you've never used it. Why would you have used it? So to problem solve and get you on board, and they actually get to know you through that process in a way that during an interview we would never get to know you. So it ends up having a very positive effect. So I appreciate your sorting that out with us. And now we know plan B is pick up the phone.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have known that. And mute your mic.
Yes, exactly.
All right, my friend. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. Brentin Mock, writer for colorlines.com. Also, you can check him out at The Nation magazine, both in print and online. He's going to be updating his blogs at colorlines.com most immediately concerning what's going on in Wisconsin, giving us up-to-date information on that. Where our reach is much smaller, his reach is grander, and he's got his backbone, his muscle, and his talent behind it. We're, again, very grateful. Thank you so much, my friend, and we will look forward to staying in touch with you.
Great. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
All right, pal. You too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.